Welcome back to the Dark Rifle Way of War. My name is Captain Adams again. I'm here to really talk to you today just kind of about our Planes of Warfare and IO series. And really I want to touch today in kind of one of our almost final videos, but I think it's going to be most impactful. We're going to call this one the cognitive domain. So just to kind of recap real quick if you're jumping in new to this video series, the cognitive domain, like we were saying earlier, so you've got the cognitive domain. It's like we were saying earlier, you've got the cognitive domain, you've got the information domain, and you've got the physical. And they're all interconnected in some form or fashion, right? So we talked previously on another video about the physical domain and how that works and what it is. And I didn't want to spend too much time on that video just because for the most part we really understand. If I can physically touch it or hold it, it's part of the physical domain. If I can blow it up, destroy it, move it, disassemble it, construct it, it's physical, right? And then you have the information domain. And that's something whereas you need to, I keep using these words, but you need to divest yourself of all bias. You need to look at it as if it's just pure information, right? That's all it is. No bias, no context. Finally, the cognitive domain. Now they're all interlinked, and today we're going to talk about that, but we did touch on it some on our last video, talk about the information domain. But really it's how do I process what I see, what I understand, or what I hear, what I know. How do I take these two factors and make a belief, make an assumption, make a stand on something? And that's what we're going to talk about today. So if you can understand how people think, why people think, you can understand why they do the things they do, what motivates them, what makes them the person they are, right? And so if we want to do that, if we understand how they work, how they think, then that leads us to how do we change that, right? And it seems very nefarious, I know, but this is warfare. This isn't something nice. This isn't something we're trying to be, nice or polite about. We're trying to win. And so if we're trying to change somebody's beliefs using an indirect approach, maneuver warfare, then we need to make sense of a population, right? So we need to understand a few things. Let's get them right off the bat, right? So we need to understand a person or a group of people, maybe a population, we understand their culture and everything that comes along with it, right? Too often in the American military, we glance over this like it's not even important, like it doesn't even matter. Our entire 20 years in the Middle East, officer after officer, soldier after soldier, I've seen this many times in my deployment, that they didn't bother to understand the people that they were working with. I'm only here for 9 months, 6 months, a year maybe, sometimes 18 months, whatever the case may be, you would come into this theater and you would choose not to understand where they came from, right? For us, things might be more important or less important, right? Women and their place in society, headscarves, things of that nature. It was so counterintuitive to our culture that it made us upset and angry, and we would refuse to understand their side. Right? So instead of trying to fight them at every tooth and nail, I think it's more beneficial to understand them first in order to affect change. So culture is one of them, right? Then I go to mindset. And the difference between mindset and culture is really one's just more personalized, one's more personal, right? So culture is something that can be applied broadly to a large population, a large group of people. But mindset is much more individual to a person, right? So for instance, say the person that you're trying to work with, deceive, the person that your enemy commander is, you might know about him or her a certain couple aspects. Maybe they had a traumatic childhood, maybe your intelligence assets let you know about a few things that make that person the way they are today. Maybe their past employment, maybe they've worked for an intelligence gathering agency themselves, maybe they were part of the KGB, whatever the case may be. It gives you an insight, it gives you a glimpse or a look into who they are and what makes them the person they are. It gives us a mental model to build around that person so we understand the framework in which their mind works. So mindset's another one, right? After that we have heritage, right? So this can be applied in many ways. This can be applied nationally, this can be applied locally, but I'll give you a good concrete example ourselves, right? So this is our guidon right here. This is what we stand for. This is the Dark Rifle Battalion colors, right? So being a part of the 3 of the 161 Dark Rifles means certain things. It gives us a heritage, right? It means that we believe in maneuver warfare. It means that we don't give up. It means we give our hardest and do our best all the time, right? there's certain things about being a part of this organization that's different than being a part of other organizations. You can also apply this to different aspects too. Maybe being a part of a certain political party gives you certain heritage, different beliefs about a certain thing, right? Maybe being a part of a certain state, like whether you're from Washington or from California or Colorado, they all give you different perspectives, right? So that's part of your heritage. Finally, the last two ones, one is history, right? If you don't understand somebody's history, how can you interpret or understand where they're going, right? So many times we just overlook and glance this off. In some of the previous videos, I give you multiple examples from different Russian societies, Russian case studies of how they see World War II, how they saw the Napoleonic Wars, how they saw the Mongol invasion, and what their role in it was. So for them, they see themselves multiple times as the victors who had always and constantly been underappreciated and never recognized for their true potential of who they really were, and how they're always second-class citizens to the rest of Western Europe. And so it always has given them a disdain, a distaste for anything that's Western in a lot of ways, right? Because they always feel like, those Westerners, you know, they did it once back in the Napoleon, they did it during the Mongolian era, they did it during World War II, they always belittle us and they always put us down. So there's this mental model for most Russians that leads them to that same statement, right? Next part, religious beliefs. You can never understate this enough. America, for the most part, is a Judeo-Christian, predominantly, but that's not entirely all we have. We have many different faith religions and faith beliefs, and we also have some atheists as well. It's one of the things that makes America unique from most countries in the world. Not all, but most. But most countries, you have to think about where their religious backgrounds come from, because that'll give them a framework on which to see the world in. So, when you put those into different aspects, it gives you a holistic approach at who the person is that you're working with. So I know in some of the previous videos that we've done on just kind of the spheres of war, planes of warfare that Chaplain Sanders has done, he kind of touches on some of these as well. So just to kind of tell you, like, none of this stuff is new. It's just, this is the modern U.S. Army's interpretation of it. So just understanding it from a maneuverist mindset, right? Taking that indirect approach, not trying to hit, not trying to hit surfaces, trying to go towards gaps, hitting the enemy where they're weakest, things of that nature. All right, so let's give you a good example of how to understand a certain person, right? In the U.S. military, and you can really apply this to any aspect of your life, really. If you want to understand somebody and really try to get to how to influence them, we use something called the Spiderweb Method, right? So I'm going to give an example of a fictitious person. Let's call him George, all right? Now let's say George is a prominent military figure in a country, and he happens to be also a political figure as well. So he's kind of moved his way up. Let's look at a couple things, George. If we know a couple things about George, we can change and we can target information to him in a way that's going to affect his mind, right? So for instance, maybe we know George graduated from a military academy, right? Maybe we also know that George, when he was going through his earlier stages of military career, maybe we know that George was part of a military spying apparatus. Maybe he was a part of the spying apparatus, right? That might change a couple things about him. Maybe we also know that George has a sister, and he's really close to his sister. And his sister, maybe she works at one of the local universities. And maybe we also know that George, let's say for instance, he really enjoys tennis. It's his biggest sport, he really enjoys it. And we know that he also subscribes to different tennis magazines and subscriptions and things of that nature. So, if we're going to look at George, maybe we know a couple things about him already, but I want you to look at this model, not as a way in which to define him, but as a way in which to get information to him, right? So, if we look at this, we know he's graduated from military academy, which is going to give him a certain bias, a certain perception. So if you spend time with your intelligence assets to have them understand what the culture is, what the mindset, the heritage that comes out of the military academy, it's going to have an effect on him. Same thing here. If he was part of a spy organization, and then we need to understand what changes, what is his beliefs going to be about the world from that. then we need to know about this university, sister, tennis, so forth. Now, this is a very simple example. Obviously, the spiderweb can go massive, and that's important. You want to get to that point. But for this particular part here, let's just give you a couple examples, right? So if we need to make George angry, right? If we go back to our original thing, if we want to decrease his will to fight, we need to do a couple different things, right? We need to incite fear. We need to incite depression, sense of well-being. Maybe, potentially, the ultimate one is just death, right? So, in this example, if we need to put fear, depression, something of that nature, we have these conduits in which to input information into his life, right? So maybe one thing we know about George is we know George watches some news outlet, right? We'll call it CNN, right? He watches it all the time. It's his favorite thing. We also know that because of George, of who he is, he's really passionate about this military academy. What happens if a news article comes out that there's a huge scandal at this news agency? We know that they're going to pick it up and that this guy's going to run with it. And he's going to have a certain belief about it. So the information that was sent, you and I might be totally impartial to it. But for him, because he's so passionate, it might change his beliefs about something. So that's a very simplistic example. I'm trying to not get too in the weeds here. But I want you to take this model and run with it, right? So maybe you need like a sense of well-being, right? Maybe his sister is the one that really, is the glue in the family, right? Maybe George is a terrorist. Maybe his sister is a terrorist. And if we're trying to find George, what better way than threatening that, right? So just think about these things. How do we influence this person? How do we defeat his will to fight? So, just remember, all parts of warfare, it's not meant to be pretty. You're not here to go blow for blow. You're not fighting on the same level. You want to go at him as hard as you can with everything you've got, hit him where it hurts him the most when he's least expecting it, and you just keep piling on the pain until they give up. This isn't a game where we want to graduate our violence. We want to come in there with overwhelming violence so that they give up, they lose their will to fight. So the things I talk about, it seems brutal, but that's the point. That's what we're trying to get to. All right, my last thing I want to talk about here when it comes to just understanding the cognitive domain is deterrence, right? So, within deterrence here at the Dark Rifles, and you can find this many other places, we look at deterrence in kind of as a three-legged stool, right? So, if you have a three-legged stool, there's three different things that you need to have in order to successfully have deterrence. If you're missing any one of these three, the stool, it will not stand, it will not work. So, you need to demonstrate three different things. Number one, that you're good at fighting. Number two, that you're capable of fighting. And number three, that you're willing to fight. The thing about deterrence is if you can only show one or two of these capabilities, but not all three, then you have not successfully deterred anybody. So it's important that you have to do it. But here's the thing about deterrence, right? If you take in our minds and you start thinking about some of the past videos we've just done, deterrence is not something physical, right? It's not even something informational. It's a state of belief. It's a state of where you're at, right? So for instance, deterrence, it doesn't have to be true, right? It just has to be believed, right? That's the thing. If the enemy feels deterred, then he is deterred, right? It's not whether the truth on the ground, it's how does he feel, right? So there's a quote I kind of want to give you guys real quick. I want you to kind of think about this as well. I think it really aptly kind of captures this whole concept. The quote I want to share with you guys is this one right here. It goes, "The pessimist complains about the wind. The optimist expects it to change. the realist adjusts the sails. And that was given to us by William Arthur Ward. The reason I like this quote so much is because it really kind of dives and gives you a quick glimpse and just a reference point for what we're looking for in the cognitive domain, right? If you're just looking at the facts, right, that physical domain, you're like, well, the wind sucks, right? The enemy has too many tanks. The enemy has got too much going on. That's just a fact. I'm just going to complain about things, right? Maybe if you're looking from an information side, like, I'm going to expect it to change. The optimist expects it to change. Well, I'm just going to do something, maybe the weather will play a factor or something to that effect. But a maneuverist, he looks at it from a different perspective. He says the realist adjusts to the sails, or adjusts the sails. So from our perspective, right, if we understand where the enemy's coming from, what he's thinking about, how we can affect what he thinks, and we look at that spider web, right, we have all those hundreds of different avenues, and we start presenting information to him, right? So he's got his S2 cell over here, he's got his S4, and if we blow up a convoy and we inject some misinformation, disinformation, maybe we throw in some cyber warfare, we do all these things to mess with him so that it paints a picture in his mind. Belief is reality at this point. It doesn't matter what the truth is on the ground, it's just what he believes. And so that's kind of what we're getting for, right? So for us, right, we need to adjust our sails. We need to realize that in order to change somebody's perception, we don't need to fight what's out there. We don't need to fight his culture. We don't need to fight his heritage, his religious beliefs. We need to understand them, right, and adjust our methods. I feel like the failings we've had kind of in the Middle East for the last 20 years is we refuse to want to understand our enemy at a fundamental level. We would just stand there and try to impart our own Western Judeo-Christian values on them, which never worked. It was incompatible for what they wanted. And there was just never enough time to try to change their beliefs. So, that being said, we need to come at them from their own perspective. The last thing I just want to leave as a kind of as a farewell point before we go on to our next video is really just talk about soft powers. So, this is just a plug, in a way, for the overall American concept. So in the military, we have only so much available at our capacity. But if you're watching this video and you want to learn a little more, I recommend looking up what American soft power is. This is the idea of us projecting our power beyond just military means, right? So whether it's culture, whether it's Voice of America, things of that nature, right? When we, from the United States military perspective, cooperate with people like the Department of State, when we cooperate with other three-letter agencies, we're able to bring much more to bear and bring a cohesive message than just a military one. And so I want you guys to think about what that is, do some research. If you want, we can do another video later on, but I think it's really important to think of that. We as a military, we can't just take a look at this from just our own foxhole. We need to look at this from a holistic approach. Some examples of soft power can really be found during the Cold War era. That was when America was at the height of its soft powers, and you can find a lot of examples during that time. So, with that said, the next video we're going to go into is going to be about targeting. We'll have a link up here probably somewhere as well, and I just want you guys to give you a concrete example of what targeting is going to look like. We're going to dive deeper into that spiderweb example, where I hope you guys learn some good knowledge about how that works. So, with all that said, hunt, race, kill. I'll see you guys in the next one.